Ukraine has been launching drone strike after drone strike on Russia, hitting Russian territory whenever it can. The vast majority of these drone strikes have been utter failures. So a lot of these unmanned aerial vehicles, a lot of these drones end up crashing. They end up losing their direction, their route, losing control. Russia intercepts them, Russia strikes them down. There really hasn't been any deaths to these drone strikes and in very few casualties. Now, these drone strikes have been happening over and over and over again. And one of them, actually, if you remember, several months back, actually struck the parliament building in Russia, the Duma. And this has been a sign, a signal of desperation, because these drone strikes have only ramped up as Ukraine has entered into the third month of its counteroffensive, and that counteroffensive has gone dreadfully. That counteroffensive has seen the loss of more than 43,000 of Ukraine's forces. It has seen a huge portion of its NATO arsenal completely destroyed, and Ukraine has not penetrated Russia's first defensive line, really playing around and going deep and losing a lot of forces to try to take very small parts of of Russian territory. So this has been a big problem for Ukraine. And these drone strikes have not been a sign of strength. They haven't changed anything on the battlefield. They have shown deep and utter weakness. And they're likely to continue. Now, there have been another set of drone strikes on Russia. And this time they have occurred on the border with Estonia. And so, as you all may know, Estonia is a NATO member. So let's take a look at the report here. First from RT. Drone attacks, this happened on August 29th. Drone attacks an airport in Russian city near a NATO border. The Pskov airport was attacked by unmanned aircraft close to 2 EU countries. So the Russian city of Pskov, near the territories of NATO members Estonia and Latvia, came under attack by a swarm of drones in the early hours of the 29th. The regional governor confirmed the raid, while videos showing explosions and air defenses lighting up the sky made the rounds of social media. The Russian military is repelling a drone attack on Pskov airport. Regional Governor Mikhail Venernikov confirmed on Telegram, adding that he was on site since the start of the incident. Initial information says there were no casualties. We are working to assess property damage. So all flights were canceled. And here are some of the pictures and images of the attacks here. So all from Telegram. So according to several Telegram channels, over a dozen drones targeted Pskov airport, and air defenses were engaging additional unmanned aerial vehicles. Social media footage showed what looked like an explosion accompanied by a sound of small arms fire. The Russian outlet Redovka claimed that 15 Ukrainian drones targeted the Pskov airport and were shot down, including with small arms fire. Something appeared to have crashed or exploded on the airport, and emergency services responded to the incident. There were no reports of casualties. So Telegram, so more Telegram channels. So as you know, Telegram is Russian social media. And you can find a lot of great information on Telegram about what's going on in this conflict. So the MASH Telegram channel reported that one of the drones may have struck a fuel depot and set it on fire, causing a thick black smoke to rise above the city. So this is the key thing, though. So if you have 15 drones attacking a Russian city, right, destroying military aircraft, this is only 700 kilometers north of Ukraine. So 700 kilometers north of Ukraine, but only 30 kilometers from the Estonian border, and the Latvian border is just 60 kilometers southwest, both being NATO member states. So the context is that Ukraine has previously sent these drone swarms at Crimea, where Russia's air defenses took care of them. And this has been a story on and on and on, that these drones have tried to attack Russian territory, destroy Russian infrastructure, target Russian civilians, and oftentimes they fail. But the problem here, again, is that we're talking about now, rather than it being an obvious Ukrainian attack, now there are suspicions that NATO directly conducted an attack. Estonia and Latvia, they run along Russia's border. They are NATO countries. They are former Soviet republics as well. And their admission into NATO decades ago was always a very, very, very touchy subject for Russia, right? Russia has not appreciated this. It has been one of the major reasons why Russia has cited NATO as a huge security risk, because these countries continue to enter NATO and threaten Russia's border, encircling Russia effectively. So that is the big danger here. That is the big danger here, is that NATO is encircling Russia, aiding Ukraine in a proxy war against Russia, throwing all this aid. Now you have drones entering Russia's territory, Russian cities, and they could very well have likely come from NATO countries, which would then mean that NATO directly attacked Russia. Now, of course, Estonia has denied this, and here's a report from Newsweek demonstrating this. Estonia denies link to Russian airport drone strike. Estonia's government denied a drone strike on the Russian city of Pskov on Tuesday. Denied a drone strike on the Russian city of Pskov on Tuesday could have come from the NATO member country after rumors spread online. And so it shouldn't be any wonder why these rumors spread, right? Because let's be honest, if we look at a map, if you look at a map, take a look at a map of Estonia, Latvia, and of course take a look at Ukraine. So if these drones came and targeted this city from Ukraine, they would have had to pass through eastern Belarus. And now we all know, or at least we should know, that Belarus is a staunch ally of Russia and likely wouldn't allow Ukrainian drones to enter its airspace without consequences. In fact, Belarus has said many times, and Lukashenko has said many times, that an attack on Russia's attack on Belarus and vice versa. And if you try to attack through Belarus, Belarus will defend itself. So it will not get caught up in such a conflict. So drone attacks hit targets on Tuesday in western regions of Bryansk, Oryol, Kaluga, Ryazan, Moscow, and Pskov. So it's many cities getting hit by drones now. In Pskov, close to the border of Estonia and Latvia, both European Union and NATO nations, fires broke out at a military airport following explosions with at least 4 I-76, or is that double I? I'm not a military expert. I need Brian Barletic here. So military transport aircraft were damaged. Drone attacks on Russian territory have become almost daily occurrences in recent weeks. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said in July that an 18-month-old war is gradually returning to Russia's territory, to its symbolic centers and its military bases, and what he described an inevitable, natural, and absolutely fair process. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility for the strikes as of this report. So this report occurred on the 30th, the day after these strikes occurred, but that has since changed, and I'm going to get to that. So there's a rumor that went around on Russian television that Turkish sources claim that it was Estonia that conducted the strikes, and added, if it's true, then Estonia must be wiped off the face of the earth. There's no reasoning provided for the claims other than the distance between Estonia's border and Pskov. The Estonian government has firmly denied the claims. A statement sent to Newsweek from the spokesperson of the government office of the Republic of Estonia said this is false information. That is it. So that's all they said. They said this is false, right? And there's more to this. There's more. So let's continue, because this Newsweek article is showing the plethora of hypocrisy and contradictions embedded in this issue. You have Zelensky saying, and this is the point of the drone strikes, to try to play up that there's some kind of symbolic value to try to create a theater of war where public relations can have it look like, well, now Ukraine has the upper hand because it's able to strike Russian territory. Mind you, they share a border. And if you have drones, then perhaps you can get through and start striking on Russia. However, they have not been very effective. And of course, Zelensky is not really keen on acknowledging this fact. But I digress. The point here, though, is that all Estonia could say was, this is false information. There is, though, reason to believe, and this is the comments that Newsweek wants to go over. They say, some of the comments about the strike note the distance between Pskov and the Ukrainian border. As a crow flies, the closest distance between the Russian city and Ukraine is about 310 miles. That would have required the drone to fly through the airspace of Belarus. Avoiding Belarusian airspace could extend the journey to 700 miles, depending on the route. So if they have to go 700 miles, it's highly unlikely that Russian air defense systems would not have picked that up. It's very highly unlikely. So in July, reports suggested Beaver drones could have been behind the attacks on Moscow, which are believed to have a range of in excess of 620 miles. Ukrainian state arms producer Ukroboronprom posted on Facebook that it successfully tested a drone with a range of 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles. So another problem here is that these drones may not be able to go that far, that they're just testing out drones that can go up to possibly the distance of 700 miles, but not likely if they have to go around Belarus's airspace. So the Russian Defense Ministry said that 2 Ukrainian drones have been shot down in Ryazan Oblast, southeast of Moscow, another drone in Kaluga, located southwest of the capital. So these drone strikes are happening, and there's a lot of fish. It's fishy. It doesn't smell good, right? It doesn't smell good that Russia is being attacked in this way, and now these drones are hitting cities very close to NATO member states with the potential that these drones do not have the capacity to get to Russia should they be Ukrainian, just using the technology at their disposal. It is likely that Estonia conducted this. We don't have verifiable proof of that. Estonia, of course, is going to deny it. But nonetheless, it is important to note that this attack could very well have come from NATO member states, because we know that Belarus is not going to allow Ukrainian drones to fly over its airspace to strike Russia. So now, all right, so to conclude what what Ukrainian forces have said about this. So at first, there was no acknowledgement from Ukraine's side, right? No acknowledgement that this had occurred. And or there was no acknowledgement that this was their fault. Before, in the past, you remember all of these drone strikes. Ukraine is quick to take credit, and Zelensky said it in that Newsweek article. He said, Russia's war is coming home. This is all about how terrible Russia is doing in the war. That has been the narrative, right? That these drone strikes show that Russia is actually losing control of the narrative and legitimacy is dwindling. The exact opposite of true is true, of course, but that's neither here nor there. Now you have Ukraine confirming that it was responsible for the drone strikes, supposedly. This was reported today, the last day of August, and this is very curious now, right? It's very suspect. At first, Ukraine did not want to confirm, did not want to take credit for this. Now, suddenly, Ukraine wants to take credit for this. So, BBC reports that Ukrainian government officials confirmed to the BBC that Ukraine was behind Wednesday's drone attack on a Russian airbase in Pskov. A number of Ulyushin transport planes were said to be damaged or destroyed. The official from the Ministry of Defense confirmed local reports that Ukrainian military intelligence GRU, or the GUR, was behind the attack. Meanwhile, President Zelensky said that Ukrainian-made weapons had hit a target at 700 kilometers distance. He did not specify the weapon or the target, but the distance could correspond to the Pskov attack. Ukraine believes that the planes were destroyed, that 4 planes were destroyed and 2 others damaged. Russian officials say 4 planes were damaged. The damaged aircraft are long-range cargo planes, ideal for transporting troops and equipment over long distances and therefore valuable war assets for Russia. Russia has vowed that this will not go unpunished. Ukraine's drone war on Russia is now almost a daily occurrence. Wednesday's attacks at Pskov, Bryansk, and elsewhere were among the most widespread so far. A fuel depot in Kaluga and a microelectronics factory in Bryansk, where components for Russian weapon systems are made, were also hit. So the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, said another drone had been shot down southeast of Moscow. Earlier, Russian media reported dozens of flights had been delayed at Moscow airports, a regular occurrence during drone attacks. In a Telegram post, Bryansk Regional Governor Alexander Bogomaz said 3 drones have been shot down near Bryansk. So again, this is the scope of the problem here. Ukraine is unleashing drones on Russia. And it's doing so nearly every single day now, of course, with little effect. I mean, these military aircraft were likely destroyed, a small number. And of course, this is going to be played up as some kind of huge victory. But nonetheless, it really isn't. If you take the weight of what's happening in this counteroffensive, how much weaponry and manpower Ukraine is losing versus Russia, this is really just a drop in the bucket for Russia. But again, this is about narrative management and narrative control. And one of the things they can't control is how suspect this attack really looks. So Ukrainian officials are generally tight-lipped about attacks inside Russia, but it seems that as the campaign gathers pace, officials in Kiev are more willing to claim them as part of the country's war effort. And that's actually not 100% true. When these drone strikes occur, these drone strikes are generally credited to Ukraine, and Russia is very quick to out them as Ukrainian drone strikes. That is true. But one thing that that Ukraine really wants to promote is this idea that these strikes are happening almost organically, that they're almost like a rebellion against a colonial aggressor. That's how Ukraine has been trying to spin this war from the beginning, and that's how Zelensky and Ukraine's defense ministry and elsewhere are trying to spin it now. So, in effect, though, when we look at what's going on, and, I want to pull up the Moscow Times because today they had, today there were more drone strikes that I want to show you. The fact of the matter is, though, and here we have more reports, right? Russia, this is the Moscow Times, opposition. It's Russia opposition-funded media, anti-Russia. So more drones headed for Moscow. This was today. Russian air defenses destroyed a drone as it approached Moscow. They said Thursday morning. Said Moscow's local government, air defense systems, and located around 60 kilometers from Russia's capital, destroyed a drone flying toward Moscow, said the mayor of Moscow. He did not specify where the drone had come from. Russia's defense ministry later said in the statement that the drone was Ukrainian. So they're going after the capital. Ukraine is going after the capital. But this attack on Pskov, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I'm probably not. Pskov. Russia is a very difficult language for me to grasp. And so I apologize to all my Russian viewers if there are any out there right now. But this attack on this airport, this is a serious thing. This is serious. It's a military aircraft, yes. Of course, these drone strikes are part of this conflict, and we can't expect Ukraine, if we know it has a record of trying to attack Moscow with drones, trying to hit Russian territory with drones, then of course we expect this from Ukraine. But at the same time, it is very difficult to imagine that this could have been done by Ukraine. Not because Ukraine doesn't have the will to do it, but because, and I want to show you a map now, briefly, all right? We'll go to Google Maps, evil Google. So here is the city, and let me see if I can actually zoom in, okay? Here's a city that was targeted, okay? So that's surrounded in red here. And of course, let me zoom out so you can see it. Can I get rid of this? Yes. Here's Estonia. Here's Latvia. Here is where these drone strikes occurred. So as you can see, the distance is quite close. But let's see where Ukraine is. And as you can see, Ukraine cannot. So here's Belarus. So this is why it is very difficult to believe, not just because of distance and whether the drones can hit Russia, Ukrainian drones can hit Russia. They can. But as you can see here, right, the distance to get to Pskov, right? So we're talking about, this is Pskov right here. Estonia, Latvia, of course, within a very short distance. And here is Ukraine. So Kiev, right? Kiev would have had to send their drones through eastern Belarus here in order to get to Pskov. And even if, right, even if they went around, they would have had to cover all of this Russian territory, right? And then here you can see Bryansk. You can see where these drone strikes are happening. They're happening along the Russia-Ukrainian border, right? They're happening along where the conflict is taking place. So if Ukrainian intelligence were to have conducted this, they would have had to either have done it in, of course, they could have done it inside Russia if they had the ability and the capacity to. Perhaps they do. But then again, we're talking about a pretty competent Russian intelligence services as well. And so that's possible. But at the same time, it's also very possible, given Estonia and Latvia's position on Ukraine, given their NATO membership, given the fact that NATO has been collaborating, colluding with Ukraine, literally propping Ukraine up, it is also not out of the question that Estonia and Latvia could have launched these drones, maybe on behalf of Ukraine, maybe with the help of Ukraine, maybe it was a joint attack. But nonetheless, you can see here where there could be deep suspicions, right? Just given, we can zoom in again, given the distance, given how far the drones would have to travel. Perhaps they were launched from inside of Russia. Perhaps that is possible. But at the same time, Russia right now is very hyper vigilant on these attacks because they're happening almost daily. So Russia's security, both internally and externally, is very much on high alert. And that's how they've been able to stop any real casualties from occurring, is because these attacks are detected quite early and they're unsuccessful generally from the start. So given that this actually destroyed military aircraft, given that it's so close to Estonia and Latvia, given that Ukraine would have had difficulty launching them from within its own borders, what's left of them, then all this is to say that we should be questioning whether NATO directly attacked Russia. This was the fear all along. And I'm just going to close up this map now. This was the fear all along with this conflict. This is why Russia was talking about its legitimate security interests. This is why Russia did not want to see NATO membership. And now you have NATO official Stoltenberg. You even have the United States. You have a lot of backdoor channels from the collective West trying to nudge Russia and say, well, just accept that Ukraine will be a NATO member and we'll give you all the territory. We'll just let you have it. We'll make Ukraine cede it. And Russia will never take such a deal. And it's because of the risks embodied in attacks like this. Because Russia always has to wonder, is its borders going to be violated? Is there going to be a military attack on it by an installation like NATO, which has a track record of doing this? This is why Russia has called NATO encirclement, has said Ukraine's NATO membership is a red line for it, because NATO has encroached on its borders. And now we're seeing in this conflict, the longer it goes on, the more Ukraine gets desperate and more desperate. All of this points to the potential of a possible NATO-Russia confrontation. And so in my estimation, I believe there needs to be more investigations on this. I do not believe that Russia, given that there are attacks, potential attacks on Moscow seemingly daily by drone strike, given how these drone strikes have been so unsuccessful uh, when they come from Ukraine, given that the technology is limited in the sense that Ukraine can't really launch a drone from Kiev or from most parts of Ukraine and get to this airfield, get to this military aircraft container with any real capability without crossing Russia's ally, without crossing Belarusian airspace. Given all these factors, we have to wonder and we have to question just how much culpability do these NATO countries have? And of course, they're all trying to sweep it on the rug. And I think that's another interesting piece of this. And I think this is a pattern in this conflict that we're going to continue to see. We're not going to see, and I think sometimes people who are critical of NATO and who condemn what NATO is doing, they have this belief that what's going to happen is NATO is just going to declare war on Russia, or they're going to do something incredibly, incredibly dangerous and also take credit for it. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't believe that NATO has that capability. I don't believe they're in a position of strength right now in this conflict. So, in that position of weakness, in that position of being beaten back, Ukraine is not winning this conflict. There's no military victory in sight for Ukraine. Given that, you're not going to see NATO take credit for anything. Estonia's statement was extremely brief. And mind you, Estonia is not even a government, to be honest. If you know the history of the Sino of the not Sino Soviet split, if you know the history of the fall of the Soviet Union, you know that Estonia was a republic of the Soviet Union and that it is one of the many NATO statelets that was basically created after the fall of the Soviet Union in order to weaken Russia. Many of these countries do not have stable governments or really any government at all. They're basically protectorates of NATO. They're basically mouthpieces of NATO. They're basically military outposts of NATO, and their economies have been devastated. Their regions, their countries, they've been destroyed. That's what they are. So it's not out of the question that they would participate in this way and not really have much to say about it, because there really isn't much dignity there. Where the questions need to go are to NATO itself, which I think is warranted given that NATO has a track record of building up and building up and building up toward war. And the Ukraine conflict was always part of it. It was always part of it. It was the next step in this larger neocon project against Russia. And these drone strikes, while as ineffectual as they are, and while they come in this context of desperation, and Ukraine just can't get out of its own way, despite the fact that they come out of this context, it doesn't mean that they aren't dangerous. It doesn't mean that these attacks are not dangerous. They are, because the more that Russia's territory gets attacked, the more Russia needs to defend itself. The more that Russia needs to defend itself, the more that NATO becomes frustrated. And the more frustrated NATO becomes, the more dangerous its actions become. And that is the cycle here. And the cycle starts with NATO and it ends with NATO. Russia is defending itself. This is Russian territory. This is Russia's country. No matter how much Ukraine wants to brag about how Russia's war is coming back to its borders, that was never the case. This was always a NATO encroachment. It was always a NATO proxy war. Zelensky is a mouthpiece of NATO, and these drone strikes, no matter if they're coming from Ukraine or Estonia, they are a NATO project. But once we start to look into whether now, and this is why this story is significant, now there are direct attacks coming from NATO countries, perhaps, or even if there's a suspicion of such a thing, well, then we have a problem that we've always had. And that is that NATO is designed to destroy Russia. That's what its purpose is. That's what its goal is. It's been its goal since the Cold War, during the Soviet era. That was what NATO was all about. It wasn't to defend Europe. It was to basically galvanize Europe and galvanize whoever it could regionally in order to destroy the Soviet Union and then, of course, Russia thereafter. That is the purpose of NATO. That is why these drone strikes are happening. They're ineffectual, they're pathetic, they're desperate, but they are a threat to global peace and security. And the reason is because now we're talking about the potential of a NATO country, or maybe possibly a couple of NATO countries, maybe colluding with Ukraine, working with Ukraine, amplifying Ukraine, helping Ukraine do such a thing. And that only spells danger. That only spells concern. We should not allow this to just get brushed under the rug, because we're going to see more of this. This conflict is not over. This is a war of attrition. Russia is winning the war, but we can expect Ukraine to get more and more desperate. We can expect NATO to get more and more desperate the more that this becomes a reality, the more that Russian victory becomes a reality. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.